So in this screencast we're going to continue thinking our way through the SY4 exam paper by focusing on the second section of the exam. And the instruction that you get at the start of this section is to choose one question from the following options. So what you'll see on the exam paper are two options. You'll see the Understanding World Sociology option, which is the one that you will focus on. And then underneath that you'll see another option called Understanding Social Inequalities, and you just ignore that section. Okay, that's nothing to do with you. That's for other students who've been taught that particular option for SY4 instead of the World Sociology section. So you choose one question from the World Sociology section. So we can see that underneath the World Sociology title we've got two questions. We've got question 2, and it's got A, which is the 20-mark question, and then B, which is the 30-marker. Or we do question 3, which again has the 20-marker and the 30-marker. So when you get into the exam, make sure that you read the questions carefully, at least a couple of times, so that you can make your mind up about whether or not you want to do 2A and 2B or 3A and 3B. And I'm going to imagine that I've read through the questions carefully and I've decided that I'm going to do 2A and 2B. Time management is critical once again, and I recommend that you spend about 30 minutes on the 20 marker and then 40 minutes on the 30 marker. So out of the 2 hours that you've got for the SY4 paper, I'm recommending about 70 minutes in total for the World Sociology questions. Now in the exam I'd be thinking that the 20-mark question is a good opportunity to bank lots of marks because it's the most predictable section of the exam. We know that the question is going to start with the phrase identify 2 areas of life, one from the developing and one from the developed world, and then it's either going to say where there is gender inequality or where there is ethnic inequality, like we can see on 3A, where there is class inequality, or it's just going to say where there is inequality. It's going to leave it entirely open. And with these questions, where it doesn't specify, it's up to you to either focus on gender or class or ethnic inequalities. So it's entirely up to you as to which aspect of inequality that you focus on for this question. So I'm going to imagine that I feel most confident about gender inequalities, so I'm going to use that as my example for 2A. So how I would set out this particular question: in the case of developing countries, remember the notes that I've given you are on educational inequalities. So I would need to write about 3 paragraphs describing and interpreting evidence of gender inequalities in relation to education, and then I'd also want to include an additional paragraph where I explain how these educational inequalities are connected to other forms of inequality. Obviously if you can't read or you can't write, then that's going to disempower you, and that's going to affect adversely on your life chances on so many different areas. Then I'd move on and look at the developed world, again focusing on gender. Again I would need to write about 3 paragraphs looking at evidence of gender inequalities in relation to politics in rich countries like our own, and then again an additional paragraph explaining how this might be connected to other forms of inequality. Remember, the key to getting most of the marks for this question, and you should be aiming to try and get most of the marks because this is so predictable, is you've got to make reference to hard evidence in your answer. You cannot just rely on anecdotes. Make sure that you use the notes that I've given you to talk about specific pieces of evidence, statistics, studies, real examples. Moving on to the 30-mark question, remember we're going to try and spend 40 minutes on this. The first thing that I would be thinking as I look at this essay question is, what type of essay is it? And it starts with this command, evaluate the view, and that would immediately make me think that this is a question that is asking me to evaluate a claim. And for these types of questions, I would recommend planning this essay using a 4-part essay structure. So you need an introduction, you need to look at arguments that support the claim in the question, you need to look at arguments and evidence against the claim in the question, and then you need to draw an overall conclusion. So what's the claim in this question? Well, the claim is that aid can do little to solve the problems of the developing world. So in relation to this particular claim, the key word is aid. And obviously that needs to be defined, that needs to be unpacked, because there are different forms that aid takes. And I need to be careful not to overgeneralize about the effects of aid. In fact, one way in which you can demonstrate evaluation for these 30-mark questions is to sometimes question the premise upon which the question is based. My argument is we cannot generalize about aid. There are certain types of aid which might be a waste of money, that might lead to more problems, but there are other examples of specific forms of aid that have actually been highly effective. What does the question mean by the problems of the developing world? Well, remember, the developing world are poorer countries that we've been focusing on throughout the World Sociology course, and the problems that they face are their lack of development and the inequalities that you find within these countries. So we can see the problems both in terms of the lack of economic development that you find within these countries, and also the lack of human development. So the lack of human development would include things like the disease burden, and actually there have been some really successful examples of aid that's been geared towards things like vaccinations, that have been very, very effective at dealing with some of the disease burden. Education would be another area of human development. Now this question, unlike the one below, is not specifically on a theory of development, but if you understand the theories, you can apply them to any question. So one of the things that I would be thinking about as I do my plan for this 30 marker is, how can I apply some of the theories that I've learned really as the building blocks of the World Sociology course. So for example, I would be thinking that neoliberalism is a perspective that is very critical of aid. So they would support the claim that aid does little to solve the problems of the developing world, whereas a perspective like modernisation theory would be much more positive. By the way, the other 30-mark question that we can see at the bottom of the slide, this one that asks you to evaluate the usefulness of Marxist explanations for inequalities in the developing world, the perspectives that we would refer to as Marxist explanations in the field of world sociology are dependency theory and world systems theory. They're the theories that have been most influenced by a Marxist perspective. They're very, very critical of the effects of global capitalism on the developing world. Now, if you were to finish the paper with a few minutes to spare, make sure that you don't just sit there. Go back and check. See if there's anything that you can add or amend in your answers. And particularly useful, if you did have a few minutes to spare, would be to go back to the very first methods question, the 10-mark question, and see if there's an additional reason that you can identify and describe. And the way in which it will be marked is if you've identified and explained 3 particular reasons for the methods 10 marker, and one of those reasons is wrong, but the other 2 are right, then you would still get all of the marks. But obviously only add a 3rd reason if you've got some time to spare at the end of the exam. Now, alongside these screencasts that explain how you should be thinking in the exam, make sure that you've looked at the other screencasts on exam technique. Okay, there's lots of really important advice and lots of examples to help you really master the technique for the exam papers, and that's so important. So for SY4 there are two exam skills screencasts to watch, one that focuses on the method section and the other one focuses on the world sociology section. So definitely make sure that you've watched both of those videos. Also, as essay writing is such an important skill for both of the A2 papers, make sure that you've watched the two videos on how to write longer sociology essays. So the first part, this one, deals with questions that ask you how to evaluate claims, and the second one looks at questions that ask you to evaluate a particular theory or questions that ask you to evaluate sociological explanations. And both of these videos have lots of examples that are taken from the A2 topic areas, so they're really useful. And finally, for your SY4 revision, make sure that you go onto iLearn and click on these exam skills buttons, because you'll find lots of really useful resources to get you fully ready and prepared for the exam. So you'll find the past papers, you'll find glossaries of key words, you'll find lots and lots of model answers, so everything that you need to really be ready for the SY4 exam you can find on iLearn.